Welcome to Apache Karaf Essentials. I'm Jamie Goodyear. Have you ever had this problem? You're writing the same boilerplate piece of code and only have to change a couple of properties to redeploy it and redeploy it again for different departments, different users, but effectively it's the same thing being supported in many, many places. It's a problem. Thankfully, OSGi gives us a strategy to manage it. The Managed Service Factory. This factory manages multiple service instances. Bundles registering this interface are giving the config amend service the ability to create and configure instances of our service. In other words, you get to have runtime configuration driving the instances of your code. This is pretty neat. To illustrate the point, we can imagine having a common Camel enterprise integration route, just a Camel route. You take information from point A to point B, do some work around it. If we take that route and we say, give it a message, and we want that to update some database or write to some other destination, and imagine we have multiple instances of this. It's taken from one department and has to transfer by some rules and give it to some other locations, but it's the same thing every time, just coming from one place, going to another. We can have lots of these running in our JVM, and we don't want to have multiple sets of the same code with the same things hard-coded in there. It just does not make sense. And even running configuration of that, you end up having lots and lots of deployments and jars running. So what we want to be able to have is we use this managed service factory, then we create an instance of our code per configuration. The neat part here is that you're reading that from our etc folder and you're getting those configs at runtime. More on that a little bit later. So let's take a look at how this works step by step. At the beginning, we start by registering this bundle that implements the MSF, the Managed Service Factory interface, to our service registry. This is accomplished when you install the bundle. It'll wire it on in for you. We'll see some sample code for this when we get to the lab portion of the video. After this registration, the config amend system is told to watch for config files using a factory PID. So what's that PID? That is just the namespace that we are going to keep our running configurations in. In example, we're going to use the factory PID and config name in our lab sample of being along the lines of com savoir MSF, our factory name, and then some additional piece to signify this is test 1, this is test 2, say department 1, department 2, each one of our configuration files. The important part at the very beginning of that namespace has to be that factory PID that we set. After that, and we've installed that first config file and config has read it, it will inform the MSF and it's going to take that information and run an update. At that point, the MSF is going to instantiate your service interface. Pretty cool, and that means you're going to have running code into JVM. Keep in mind, this is dynamic system when we're running things in Karaf OSGi. If we add more files at runtime, more service instances are going to get created. If we alter those files, the services are going to get altered. If we delete those files, we're going to end that service run. That's pretty cool, and it's a really neat thing that Karaf can do. That being said, it's time to go into our lab. Before we start our lab, I want you to read the show notes. There's going to be a link in there to the GitHub repo that we have this lab. Now, at a very high level, what our demo is going to be able to do is run multiple instances of the same Camel route. This Camel route is only going to be logging out a greeting and a person's name to our log file. Nothing too complex. The specific implementation of Camel route we'll walk through, but generally all you need to know is that it's going to fire off an event every so many seconds, and that's going to cause a logging event to occur. These Camel routes are going to be reflected by separate configuration files. Each config file will contain a greeting and a person's name. That being said, let's take a look inside of our editor and read the code. Now that we've cloned out the code, let's have a look what's in the project. This is a standard Maven project format. We have our POM file and our source code and a folder in here of some sample config files. We'll look at those a little later. And a README. Our README file is containing all the instructions you'll need to be able to install and run this in Karaf. We'll look at that at the runtime section of our video. In our POM file, we'll see that we have set up all of our version properties for the libraries we're going to use. You'll note that we're using an older version of Camel that we use out of the box in Karaf 4.4. You can use the Camel Karaf project to bring in a newer version of Camel, but for the purposes of this video, we'll remain on that one. We also set up a Maven bundle plugin to be able to bundle up our MSF for deployment into Karaf. Let's take a look at the source code. You'll see in here that we only have a couple of classes and a single blueprint file to wire it together. One could use SCR to do all of our wiring as well, but for this demo, we're just going to show it in Blueprint. Let's take a quick look at how we've set this up, starting with our hello constants. These are the constants that are going to be inside of our config files. We have a hello name and a hello greeting. Each one of our files will contain these two properties. We have a hello dispatcher. This is the actual piece of code that's going to be running our camel route. The important part in here is that every time we add in a route, we are going to be configuring camel. The configuration of this one is going to be using the timer component. We name it hello timer, and every 10 seconds it's going to create an event. On that event, we are going to log the greeting and the name to our log file. You'll also note that we set a route ID. In the Karaf runtime, when we have camel commands available, you'll be able to take a look inside of camel context and see route instance IDs. By doing this, we can then confirm which config file to running instance we have. And lastly, we have our hello factory. This is implementing the managed service factory. The important parts in here is that it's going to connect into the service registration and service tracker from the OSGi runtime and allow us to hook in that way to the system. Some other important parts here is the implementation of our updated and deleted. What those are looking for is the instance or running instance ID for our factory PID and saying, hey, add this in if it's already here, or update it and make it created. Otherwise, remove it from the system, getting it deleted. When we're adding in a brand new instance, what we're going to do is do some basic sanity checks to make sure that we have all of our configuration in there. And we're going to grab a runtime camel context and stuff into it a brand new route or updated route. When we want to shut it down, we are going to go into the camel context and say, hey, take down that route. So this is the actual controlling of how that operates. You can imagine how you can set this up for various other libraries you may be using, but in this case, we were in camel. Outside of that, we have a little bit of boilerplate code in here for how we interact with the system as we're using Blueprint. Is the ability to start up this managed service factory or shut it all down. When we take a look in the Blueprint file, we're going to see our connection to configuration management. This is where we're going to tell it, hey, here is the PID value we want to use. You're going to notice that we're going to use this later on down here when we set up our hello factory. We also instantiate our camel context. This is the runtime that all of our routes go inside of. When we set up the hello factory, we have our init and our destroy methods been defined. We pass into it the bundle context. That is our way to access to OSGi runtime. We have our configuration PID. That's going to be that PID file we use for our factory. And we also pass in the camel context. Now that we've had to take a look at the code, let's go to the console. Okay, let's get into the project code. We can see here we have it in our terminal. We're going to just use Maven clean install to build out our project. And with that, our bundle has been built. Let's switch on over now to our Karaf runtime. We're going to start this up in another tab. And we can see we have Karaf 446 up and running. Let's just do a quick list on it. We have nothing else installed. I am going to use the information from our README file to set up the basics of this project. So we're going to install the Camel feature, Camel core, and Camel blueprint. Then we're going to add in a dependency we'll need, which is the commons lang. We're going to just start that bundle real quick. And finally, install our managed service factory. With that, we'll now see that we have all of our dependencies and the managed service factory installed into Karaf. Let's just take a quick look at the headers on that service factory, and we can see that everything's been resolved and things are ready for us to start working. Let's take a quick look into our log file so we can see that we have a camel context that's up and running. And if we use the camel command to take a look at our camel context, we'll see we have a hello context with no routes currently running. And if we take a look for camel route list, we should have nothing currently instantiated. Let us switch over now to the Karaf etc folder. We are going to copy from our project the configuration over, and I'm just going to put in the dot to make sure we copy it over. And what we're going to see when we go over to Karaf is we are going to be able to see in the log that we have picked up that config file and it started running a camel route. Taking a look at our camel context, we'll see that we now have a route that's running, and if we do the camel route list, we'll see that we have the Hello Jamie route has started. What if we were to go back into the etc folder and copy in yet another configuration file from our project? Let's put it in the test file too. And we'll make sure it's a dot. And we'll go back to our Karaf running instance and run the route list again, and we'll see we have a second route. Let's head back to the etc folder and take a look at what's inside of these config files. We'll see in the first one we had a Hello Jamie, and in the second we have a Hello Laura. What we are seeing in here is the nature of it picking up that config file and instantiating and running the code. This is the behavior we want to have, and as you can imagine, if we have dozens of these kind of routes that we want to configure, we now have a very convenient place to set it up and just run things. With this demo complete, I want to thank you so much for joining us. We look forward to seeing you in our next videos. And please remember to like and subscribe. Have a great day.